Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to another Friday of EHour, another beautiful Friday here in the fall. It's unseasonably warm here in Michigan, so I'm pretty excited to be joining you from a very sunny room today. And if I'm being honest with you, I'm pretty excited to be outside this weekend and looking forward to that. But all that excitement kind of pales in comparison to the excitement I have to bring you today's guest and the whole team to bring you today's guest. I shouldn't say I. So I am going to ask our good co-host of the past week, and then also for this week and next week. Hey, Kristen Smith's here. She's joining
Hi.
us.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Glad to be here. Not quite as
Absolutely.
sunny in Seattle as it sounds like it might be in Ann Arbor. So
That's
I'm
okay.
jealous.
There's always the opportunity to come home and experience that beautiful sunshine. So whenever you get the chance. So we've got a busy day today. So we should probably just jump right in it and get after it, as it would be said, so that we can have the most amount of time that we can with our guests. So let me share my screen real quick, everybody, and then we will be able to get on with it. Okay, Nick and Kristen, can you just confirm you're seeing what I'm seeing with the deck?
Yes, I believe so.
All good.
Perfect. Love it. Okay, EHour students, so welcome back to class. Couple housekeeping items real quick. First off, grades are posted in Canvas, as we said they would be at the beginning of each month. Do yourself a favor, go through, double check with your unique name that there are no issues with your grade, that there's no questions that don't make sense to you. And let us know, of course, if there are. And when I say let us know, I'm talking about sending an email to that email address that's within the syllabus, the 407-911 email, not to my personal email. Again, love to hear from y'all, but you're going to get an answer much quicker if you send it to that. And in addition to that, a tip of the hat to all of you for the journal entries that you did. I was really, really impressed by the dedication that you put into those, and the time, the effort, and the thoughtfulness. I hope many of your goals that you stated are already underway and that you will continue to plug away at those. So kudos and well done. Big announcement, exciting thing coming up here that we actually just wanted to invite you to, because we didn't want you to miss out on the opportunity. Starting next Friday and continuing for the next 4, the center is offering a free non-credit customer discovery workshop open to every one of you who might have an idea for an entrepreneurial venture that you want to explore. What is a customer discovery workshop? That is something that we normally are highly, highly selective on, and we only open through the EHour program to our distinguished faculty members. But because we want to get that education down to you all, and we want to make sure that you're equipped with it, we are experimenting with a new workshop to do this. So that's the exciting part. The part that has a business item attached to it is right in the middle there. Deadline is Monday night to apply. Do not miss an opportunity. This is a very valuable opportunity for you to frankly understand more about how to go through market validation and customer discovery, and how you can best think about what your entrepreneurial idea might actually have commercial value on. That link is at the bottom, but I will send that out in the announcements as well, so don't feel the need to rush and write that down. Okay, so I've been teasing about this for a couple weeks now. We've got some concrete information now to share with you. Bloomscape, our partner in crime, has agreed to sponsor this competition with us because of how you guys have been so complimentary of my plants over the weeks. So what we're going to do is every week we are going to track the questions that come in from every one of you. So the days of doing anonymous questions are over. Every student question that comes through will now be affiliated directly with your unique name or your student name. We will track the quality of those and the quantity of those. And then on December 4th, we will announce 3 winning students who will get their choice of a large, medium, and small, and not or, and small plant from Bloomscape that you'll get to pick out. So pretty exciting stuff. Justin Mass, the CEO and founder, is going to join us on December 4th for that EHour session and to announce those winners. But we really look forward to having him on. We look forward to all the questions, hopefully, that'll come out of this. You're welcome to send us any kind of questions through Canvas if you have any pertaining to this, but quality will be determined by the EHour co-hosts, the IAs, and myself. But I think you know quality, and you know what's a good question, you know what isn't. So put your best hat forward on that. Kristen, would you like to do the honors?
I would love to. I am so excited to introduce our guest this afternoon. Where you are, not here yet. But Karl Iagnemma is an authority on robotics and driverless vehicles. So not only will our engineering students, but anybody who's sort of on the roads or in or around Detroit is going to be super excited to hear from him. His commentary has been published and broadcast worldwide on Bloomberg, The Economist, CNBC, BBC, all kinds of other places as well. He was the former director of the Robotic Mobility Group at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. And while there, his research resulted in more than 150 technical publications, 50 issued or filed patents, and numerous edited volumes, including books on the DARPA Grand Challenge and Urban Challenge autonomous vehicle competitions. In 2017, Iagnemma was named one of the most intriguing entrepreneurs by Goldman Sachs and designated a member of the Recode 100 list of technology influencers. He holds MS and PhD degrees from MIT, where he was a National Science Foundation Fellow, and a BS from none other than the University of Michigan, where he graduated first in his class. Iagnemma co-founded Nutonomy Inc. in 2013 and saw the company through acquisition by Aptiv in late 2017. And now he is the president and CEO of Motional, which was formed by a joint venture by Hyundai Motor Group and Aptiv. Motional is making driverless vehicles a safe, reliable, and accessible reality. And I'm so excited to have him here. Welcome, Karl. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for the introduction, Kristen and Eric. Very happy to be here. I would say have a chance to come back to Michigan. Unfortunately, I'm sitting here in Boston. But as Kristen mentioned, I was last in Ann Arbor as a student in 1994. So it's been a while, but a lot of great memories. So I'm happy to tell you a little bit about my story and my company's story. I figured I'd start with a timeline and tell you how we got to Motional. So I formed Nutonomy, if we look at the left-hand side of this timeline, as a startup in 2013. Not that long ago, about 7 years ago. That's when my entrepreneurial journey started. Prior to that, I'd been doing research at MIT, had some ideas that I thought were promising, started a company called Nutonomy as a startup. We bootstrapped for a couple of years. Bootstrapped, as I know you guys know, it means we funded ourselves out of revenue we brought in through various means, projects for customers. In 2015, we decided, hey, we're moving slower than we need to, so let's go out, raise some outside capital. So over the course of about 18 months, we raised about 20 million bucks. Seemed like a lot of money at the time. As it turned out, we were going to need a whole lot more. And but we had 20 million or so in the bank. We did a lot with that 20 million. Among other things, we launched what was at that time the world's first robo-taxi pilot. So the world's first opportunity for people, well, it was in Singapore, to get in a robotic vehicle and experience what a driverless car actually felt like. And that was pretty exciting. It made worldwide news. 2017, we decided we wanted to partner with a bigger outfit. We had a great offer from a company called Aptiv. And so we decided to join them through acquisition. It was about a $500 million deal, 450 million bucks. So we raised 20 million and we exited at about 450. So that return on capital was great. Our investors were thrilled. Our employees were thrilled. It was a great move for us as a company. So we joined a much bigger company, 150,000 person employee business. I was the president of a business unit within Aptiv, focused still on autonomous driving. So we took our Nutonomy team, which had grown from 2 people to about 125 people, ran the business within Aptiv for a couple of years and did a lot of exciting things there. We expanded our driverless activities. We launched one of the world's first now commercial services where we were accepting fares for rides in our autonomous vehicles in Las Vegas in 2018. And then in 2019, just this last year, we announced a joint venture with Hyundai. So this was a 50-50 joint venture between Aptiv and Hyundai. It's called Motional. The valuation of that business is $4 billion at deal close, which was in March. So the timeline here, Again, feels like a lot's happened over 7 years. We went from 2 people in 2013 to a $500 million exit in 2017 to a $4 billion joint venture here in 2020. Makes me kind of tired just looking at it, but it's been an exciting trip. So I'll tell you a little bit about my experience today. If we can go to the next slide, I'll show you a video, which is a little bit of advertising about
what moves you. When people change the world, they call it a movement. Movement is power. It's opportunity. It's pushing forward, determined to create a better future. It's imagining the impossible, then making it real. It's what drives us. We are Motional, and we're making driverless vehicles a reality. The future of transportation starts now. We're focused on you, your choice, your safety, your community. We believe getting places reliably and confidently is your right. That's why Motional is changing how the world moves. Everyone's journey is different. And no matter where your journey takes you, we'll get you there. Motional. You move the world, we move you.
All right, so that's Motional. That's a little bit of who we are. Let me stick to the program here. I'll start with the try and try to give you a few snapshots of my experience over the last few years. So that video you just saw was from a few weeks ago. If you click to the next slide, Eric, I want to show you a video of where this all started. We got to go back 8 years, but I'll just let So I hope you all agree that the music is pretty on point and the titling and all the rest. But this is the try. Look, this is 2012. This is where we started as a company. What you saw in that video, the golf cart, was my co-founders, students at that time, basically doing a project on autonomous driving. And we saw enough in that video to conclude, this is me and my co-founder, that there was a business opportunity there. In retrospect, it looks a little bit crazy because when I look at it now, I see a rickety golf cart driving behind a McDonald's with a bunch of enthusiastic students on board. But look, the most important decision you make as an entrepreneur is what your business is going to do. Fundamentally, that's the biggest decision you'll ever make. Autonomous vehicles at that time and still today was a very high-risk area. I say that because, you know, when we started the company, the market really didn't exist for autonomous vehicles. It was the research kind of thing in research labs around the world. So the market didn't exist. And as you can see, I mean, the technology barely existed. We could barely drive around the block. So a fair amount of faith was required to launch the business from then. I would be very honest in saying I didn't have a clear view of how we were going to get to revenue generation, much less profitable revenue generation. I was convinced at that time that driverless technology represented a huge opportunity for value creation, meaning if we could take drivers from behind the wheel of the car, we would radically modify the unit economics of mobility services around the world. So that's what ultimately caused me to take the leap. This fundamental observation that if we could pull this off from a technical perspective, we'd create a ton of value. Okay, from a risk perspective, every venture has a ton of risks. It's all about risk, certainly at a small scale. And I just kind of touched on some of the technical risk and execution risk that was in front of us when we started the venture. But I want to talk briefly about another big risk we took. And that was really an organizational risk. So here's kind of an illustration of how we started the business and where. Pretty much on day one, we launched not only in the US, and that's a shot of MIT, of Cambridge, Mass, for those of you that recognize it, in the left side of the screen. But on the right side, that's a bunch of people in Singapore, our early employees there. So we decided very early on that we were going to have a presence 12 time zones apart, be a multinational from day one. Well, why did we do that? Really, I believed at that time, and I still believe this, that the most important thing that any startup has is its people. That's the most important resource. Beyond capital, beyond anything else, it's the people. And we had a great resource, a great talent pool in Singapore that we could draw on. We also had very strong support from the government, the Singapore government, for the technology that we were developing. So we decided, based on these two things, we were going to take the organizational risk of trying to align across 12 time zones because we thought it was worth it to have this fantastic team and this great governmental support. Ultimately, for me, what I became convinced of, in order to make that work, we had to have a great site lead. We had to have someone we could really trust there to steer the ship. So we found that person, and that worked out well for us, but there was a fair amount of risk. I was always nervous that I would wake up one day and find that team had been poached, that they'd gone off the rails, that something had gone wrong, but it hasn't happened yet. So a little bit on risk. I can comment on failure. I sometimes think I'm in the business of failure. And I mean that because, I say that because what we're developing is cutting edge technology for driverless systems. The technology isn't finished yet. It's still largely in development. We're moving toward product deployment, but we're still doing a lot of development. But if you go to the next slide, what this video is going to illustrate, and you can just run it, Eric, and I'll talk over it. It's going to illustrate that the way we make progress as an engineering organization is really through failure. So this is a simulation you're seeing of one of our cars on the road. It looks pretty, simplistic, kind of 8-bit video, but it's actually quite sophisticated under the hood. It's simulating what our car's autonomous technology would do in a bunch of different challenging scenarios. You see all these other things crossing this simulated road. There are cars, there are simulated pedestrians, simulated cyclists. And basically we're stress testing our software in these challenging environments before we ever put it on the road in real life. And often what we find is the software has trouble in a particular situation. It doesn't work as we expect. It freezes up. Sometimes it has a simulated accident. And then what we do is we go off and we iteratively fix the software based on what we see in the video. So I'm a big believer in, iterative improvement. Before we ever put any software on the road, we do more than 40,000 simulations like the ones you just saw. So failing and failing fast is part of our development cycle at Motional. Okay, last one, the do part. So, I talked a little bit about the growth of the business, giving you a snapshot of it. You saw the golf cart. So I want to give you a slight glimpse of progress. This slide really represents a snapshot of where we are today in terms of moving people with our technology. The business has grown beyond Boston and Singapore. We're now in Pittsburgh, Vegas, Santa Monica, Seoul. But on the right-hand side of the screen, what you see is some statistics around our technology's ability to transport paying customers. So if you go to Vegas today, you probably won't go today, but if you go in the coming months, and I hope you get a chance to, if you download the Lyft app, you'll have a chance to hail one of our cars. It'll ask you, do you want to take a driverless trip? You can say, sure. And if you do, there's a good chance one of our cars will show up and pick you up. We operate in about an 18 square mile area around the Las Vegas Strip in downtown Las Vegas. And you get into the car is driving itself. We've given over 100,000 rides so far. Our average rider rating, it's a normal Lyft ride, so you got to give a star rating at the end. Our star rating is almost perfect, 4.95 out of 5. If you go to the next slide, Eric, you can run that video and you can see some firsthand clips of people's experience.
Okay, so it's in autonomous mode right now.
Autonomous driving.
So there it goes. You should see that on this screen.
Everybody built it in? Yeah.
Older people, certainly me, we can't wait for it because we're not going to be able to drive forever.
This car drives by itself.
Yes, sir. It is.
Gas, brakes, even the turn signal, everything is automated.
Wow, so this was all automated just now.
And traffic is terrible.
Seems to know to keep a certain distance behind.
Wow, that's really good.
It does just feel like a person is driving.
There's tons of advantages to this. I just want it to happen now.
Okay. All right, well, I'll leave it there from an introductory perspective. Just want to close with this snapshot. This was when we announced our deal close with Motional. Great thing about doing a startup, and there's a lot of great things, is that you get to have a positive impact on a lot of people's lives, your employees. Certainly when things go well, it's very much a kind of a family atmosphere. Even when things don't go well, it's a family atmosphere. But when things go well, you know, this was a celebration picture over Zoom, people having a toast. This isn't a typical Tuesday, just to make clear, but we celebrate as a family. We get through challenging times, you know, certainly as a team, but it's been a great experience, a great ride. Happy to talk about this through some Q&A, and thank you again for having me participate in this class.
That's awesome. Thank you, Karl. That was really great. I appreciate that. You know, it's interesting, as we were talking about what we would want to kind of discuss today, we picked up on some of the writings you've done about the need for public's trust and confidence in that. And through that last video, you kind of shared the amazement of the public adoption of driverless vehicles. What is Motional doing differently from its competitors, and what aspects of that challenge of public trust and confidence do you think that Motional is best equipped to solve?
Yeah, well, I would say first, kind of broadly speaking, you know, if you're developing a product, let's say you go start a business and you're going to develop a new toothbrush. That's fantastic. You don't have to necessarily educate your public about how to use a toothbrush unless there's something fundamentally unique about it, right? We're in a new product category in some sense. Taxis have been around forever, but robotic taxis, a taxi where you get in and there's nobody there and it starts driving by itself, that's somewhat new. And so always believed that we cannot take for granted public acceptance. We can't just assume that if we build a product, people will embrace it and want to use it. And in fact, there's been surveys where people have asked members of the public, would you want to ride an autonomous vehicle? Do you trust it? A lot of people say no. They say, I'm not interested. You know, I don't trust the technology. So we've had a focus for a long time as a business on trying to answer the question, how are we going to gain public trust and acceptance? If we have a product that our consumers don't want, that's the other side of product market fit. Usually it's the side where you develop something that doesn't fit with the need. We might develop something and the demand may not be there. So, you know, we focus on that for a long time. One of the things we do, unlike most of our competitors, is we get people in our cars as much as we can. A lot of our competitors are very secretive about their technology development. I think because they don't want someone to get in one of their cars and something goes wrong and people become, you know, demotivated or they become pessimistic about the technology. I view it the other way. Sure, sometimes things go a little bit wrong, we fix it, but most of the time people have a great experience, a great ride. And what we found is, you know, when people get in our cars, a lot of times they're a bit nervous at the beginning of the trip, but they quickly relax. You saw in the video, they even started to look bored. I love that clip in the middle where everybody's just sitting there because you realize this is just a normal trip in a car, just like a regular taxi. And to me, that's the best thing we can do to get public acceptance of our technology. You know, other product categories, I think it's the equivalent of whether you're giving away a lot of product, you're somehow getting your product in people's hands so that they can experience it. Once people experience it, if it's a good thing, they're going to want more of it.
Yeah, there were a couple of student questions that were really related to that I'll ask. Really around when do you think we'll move away from human-driven cars to autonomous being more the standard? And like,
Yeah.
when do you think, how far in the future is that confidence?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there was, now I'll blame the media. Like, I think there was a bit of a media buildup around driverless cars. And certainly some of the developers, look, as a startup executive, you talk about the promise. And so I probably was part of that. But I think there was a conception that one day we're all going to wake up and no matter where we go, we're going to see only driverless vehicles. Well, it turns out it's not going to evolve that way for some good reasons. Main reason being the technology progresses as it progresses, and it progresses, linearly, more or less. We make gradual progress over time. And that means the cars get a bit smarter. They can handle increasingly complex intersections. I mean, we all know parts of cities we live in that are a bit easier to drive in, and some are a bit harder. In Boston, I live in a suburb next to Boston. It's pretty easy. If I were to go into downtown Crossing, a bit more of a pain. So what that means is we're going to deploy our technology first in the easier places, because that's where the technology, can handle the driving. And over time, we get to the harder places. So my answer to that question is typically the technology, the people say, well, when's the technology going to arrive? And the answer is, it depends where you live. If you live in a city that's warm weather, has a nice open transportation, road structure, grid-like structure. If you've got support from the government there, if you live in a state where they're supporting driverless activity, the technology, and not all states are, you're going to see the technology sooner. And by sooner, I think that means within the next 5 years, we'll have deployments in us and our competitors in dozens of cities collectively. If you're in Midtown Manhattan, well, right now the traffic's pretty light, but in a normal day, now that's hard for a human driver. And our technology, our competitors' technology, isn't quite there yet where we could navigate that type of dense traffic and kind of aggressive driving. That's going to be a bit longer.
So you touched on an interesting point with the importance of geography and of kind of state and of presumably then national government support for the industry that you're in as well. The partnership with Hyundai and then the South Korean government's dedication to pumping investment into this field seems like a huge opportunity to increase your chance of success. If you had a magic wand, what would you love to see the U.S. government do to double down and invest in this?
Yeah, the U.S. government's interesting. I mean, there's a couple dimensions. One is the regulatory part. I mentioned not all states have favorable regulatory structures in place for putting our technology on the road. And so as an entrepreneur, you go where you're wanted. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's an easier path that way. You have to expend less resources to get your product to market. So you go where you're wanted. What I'd love to see in the US is that all the states have the same regulatory guidelines around them. They uniformly say, yes, you can do this under these conditions. Here are the rules. Maybe you got to pass some kind of driving test, whatever, but it's uniform. That'd be a huge advantage for the US. It's not the case today. But you mentioned partnership, with Hyundai. Again, it's the same kind of path of least resistance thinking. I think as an entrepreneur, as a startup, even when I was leading the business unit within Aptiv, you have to be aware of what you're good at. I mean, as an enterprise, what your skills set as an enterprise is. And we say sometimes where we have a right to win, meaning, sure, you can go off and do anything, but if you really look at your organization, how you're designed, the competencies you have, the people you have, where do you have a right to win? Where should you be competitive? And where are you just having wishful thinking? We looked at ourselves, we said, look, we don't know how to build cars. It may seem crazy because we were part of Aptiv, which is an automotive supplier, but they build components of cars. They build parts. They don't build the whole thing. So we realized we're not going to go off and build a car. I mean, that's not in our future. So we partnered with a company that does, with Hyundai. I mean, they build low-cost, highly reliable cars better than anybody. And oh, by the way, they invested $1.6 billion in our business. So it was a pretty good deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're living in the time of massive disruption. So I'd love to just talk about disruption. Obviously, you're disrupting an industry with what you're doing in a lot of ways. But have you envisioned any scenarios that could cause massive disruption in the trajectories of autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, it's interesting. People think that the driverless industry is disrupting, the auto industry, but I would say that's partly true. It's really more focused on, today at least, the mobility services space, which is taxis, but which is also the Ubers and Lyfts of the world. And look, they were the disruptors 5 years ago. So we're coming in with the technology saying, hey, we can actually be significantly cheaper than an Uber and Lyft ride, which, by the way, was significantly cheaper 5 years ago than a traditional taxi ride. So I guess part of my point is, it's not too long between being the disruptor and being the disrupted, number one. But for us, we just talked about this regulatory dimension. We talked about consumer acceptance. Those are two big unknowns for us. Those are areas where we could become disrupted almost before we get started. There has been to date in the AV industry, and I mean across many thousands of person years of effort, many tens of billions of dollars of investment. There's been one accident, a fatal accident, which was terrible and very regrettable. It was by one of our competitors, Uber. But a single accident across millions of miles of testing, but that accident has really cast a huge shadow over the entire industry. And really raised questions about this technology. And so if there are further accidents, if there are reasons for people to say, you know what, I actually don't want this technology in my city, and politicians agree with them, those are the kind of things that could create big headwinds for us.
So speaking about the headwinds and the idea of the difficulties that can already come in, that others can come into this industry with, you recently talked in a Wired article about how difficult it's now become for startups to break through in the AV industry because of the fact that there's so much investment that's initially needed and so much capital that's needed to really start to make a dent on things. So for our student audience here, who are maybe about half of them are studying engineering, the other half are studying a myriad of other kind of disciplines, if they're interested in going into the industry, in the AV industry, what do you recommend to them? Is it better off to go into an OEM and a large corporation that has doubled down and kind of sunk into this, or should they go into a startup that maybe has the chance to kind of get bought and get sucked in?
Well, so let me just take a half step back. I think most industries evolve similarly. You have this new phase where something is new. A bunch of startups get started. People don't really know what they're getting into in many cases, and that's fine. You have this kind of Cambrian explosion of activity. And then there's this next phase that comes where there's some consolidation. Some companies flame out because of mismanagement. Others decide to join forces and merge with each other. Others decide to be acquired by bigger companies. And so that explosion of companies becomes a smaller set. And then you have a more kind of mature kind of evolution where those few remaining companies will grow and some will prosper and some won't. The AV industry has really been no different. And we're sort of, I would say, largely past this consolidation phase. We had this initial phase. We were one of the first in the industry. We had a few competitors. Some of them are no longer competitors. Most of them have gone out of business. A couple have been acquired. And so I think for us, it's not so much unique to the AV business, but it's part of a kind of a typical business cycle. But where we are today, if someone were to start, they'd be a little bit out of phase. They'd be saying, I want to get started competing from day one, building this full software stack. And it's kind of like, well, that's already been done. But there's other opportunity. Now that we have a more mature industry, a few years ago, we were looking around for like a supplier ecosystem, a partner ecosystem. It didn't exist. So we had to build everything ourselves, all our software from scratch, all of our tooling, all of our support systems. Now we see interesting startups that pop up. I talked to one yesterday. They had a great product for just simulating a part of our system. Like you saw, I showed a video of a pretty crude simulation. They had this beautiful simulator. And I thought, well, I can go just pay for that. I don't need a team of 50 people. I can just go buy that thing and my team can go do something else. So there's more ecosystem opportunities, I think, at the moment in AV from a startup perspective. And again, I think this is a pretty natural progression. I mean, I guess the takeaway from that, I mean, probably a couple. One, it's good to be early, right? Sometimes easier said than done, but if you can be early, if you can avoid competition, you do it. But two, if you're not at that early phase, I think it's important to understand exactly, your path to success. And often it's not doing what people were doing 3 or 4 years ago. It's finding a fit and a need of what those now more mature companies are looking to purchase.
That's awesome. That was a really technology-oriented question, and I want to switch over to the people part of it, because you were in academia for a while, and then you went out and you started a company. And in your risk portion of your presentation, you talked about one of the big risks that you worried about was retaining your team, the talent that you had. So talk a little bit about how you learned to be a leader, specifically recruiting, retaining, motivating the amazing talent that you had to have in order to bring this to fruition. Where and how did you learn it, and what did you learn?
Well, first of all, being in the academic world, I think a lot of people assume you just, you're by yourself in a room writing papers all day, or I don't know, taking a nap. It's actually more entrepreneurial than I think most people would give it credit for. I know from my perspective, I was running an engineering research lab, and that was really about going off and getting grants so that I could hire really smart students who would do all the real work, and I would go get more grants, and the cycle continued. That really meant going out and pitching, ultimately. I mean, it was academic, it was hardcore technology, but it was me in a room with the program manager at the National Science Foundation, convincing him why he should give me money instead of the other smart gal who's going to come in next. So that part was actually very comfortable. I found the process of pitching VCs actually far easier than what I was used to at MIT, pitching, the engineering, the people controlling the engineering dollars. But then, and the people side, again, similarly, it's very competitive at a place like MIT to get the best students. You got to sell. And I think it's maybe it's stating the obvious, but any really business you go into, there's going to be a component of selling. You got to get people excited. You got to convince people of the mission. And I think people want to be convinced. Look, startups to some degree self-select. People who want to join startups want to get in and do something new. There's a bit of a risk-taking element. That's great. But they also want to have an impact. They often want to be part of something that, is thinking big. And so being able to articulate that story and tell that narrative, that's part of the skill set. And I think I don't want to, shouldn't sound cynical. It's not. I think a lot of the value we created was around our brand, being able to tell the story that helped us attract great people. It helped us find great partners, find great investors, ultimately find a great acquirer. So I spent a lot of time on what I guess you would call PR and marketing, but both external and internal communications. I think we spent more time on that than your typical startup.
That's fascinating. To that point about kind of the people and the organization, and then kind of parlaying that into the idea of softer skills and non-technical skills, I love the term you used a moment ago with Cambrian explosion to describe kind of the activity and what has happened. In addition to your work as a researcher and a technical expert, you've also authored 2 books, one of which was described by the New York Times as richly imagined and laced with delicate ironies, which I just thought was a beautiful little line. So the question I guess I'm wondering is, how has writing impacted your ability to be a better founder or CEO?
Well, it's really this idea of the narrative, of telling the story. Like I said, you can have a great startup, you can have a great product you're building, you can have a great plan and strategy, but if you cannot explain that even to your employees who you think know everything that you're doing, but they don't, the reality is they don't, because they don't know what's inside your head. If you can't explain that to them in a way that's compelling, in a way that connects the dots, not just from what happened yesterday to what's happening today, but to what's going to happen tomorrow and what might happen the day after that. If you can't do that, you're going to have real trouble. You're going to have trouble retaining people. You're going to have trouble talking to investors. I think it's all about the narrative. I really do. If I were to pick one single skill that I would say is the most important, and I really believe this, it's the ability to tell a story. I think it's the most important skill a startup founder can have. You can find people who are great technologists. You can go buy them. You can find great product people. You can find good marketing people. They're all there. But if you can't tell a story, it's going to be tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things I think I really love, it's near and dear to my heart, is that, there's a big technology portion that we could dive into about your company, but we've talked a lot about other skill sets that, really, truly are important. When you think about autonomous vehicles, there are a number of student questions in here that get you into the ethics space. So obviously there's logic in the cars that in tough situations have to make ethical decisions. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you approach that and how your team sort of thinks through and where you find inspiration and help getting through some of those tough decisions.
Yeah, it's a good question. We sometimes get this question of, how the car will make decisions that somehow reflect a moral or ethical choice between two alternatives. Should you, in an extreme situation, choose to, maybe in a case where you can't avoid a collision, would you have a collision with, like an elderly person or a child, right? The reality is the cars are not that smart today. We don't have the ability to discriminate and gather sufficient information to really make fine-grained judgments like this. I mean, you saw the simulation where we put boxes around something. We say, well, that's a pedestrian. That's kind of how the car sees the world. So part of the cop-out answer is, well, we don't have that sufficient information to even make the judgment. The more, I would say, nuanced answer is those kind of ethical questions are interesting in part because there's no actual answer. There's no solution. There's no right answer to these questions that we can formulate on should you do X or Y in these, trade-off situations, these moral and ethical trade-off situations. Should you hit the bus full of school children or should you hit the... So there's no right answer there. So we tend to think about, from a technology development perspective, we tend to think about things fairly agnostically. We do have a lot of thinking behind how we, of course, minimize the risk of any collision, and that's the fundamental goal. And how we then minimize risk to people, soft things, rather than cars, So we do have some hierarchical thinking, but we don't get to a level of granularity that would reason about someone's age, gender, whether they're a good person or a bad person, whether it's, Mother Teresa or young Hitler or something like that.
That's good. Another student question that came in, we'll have to maybe think about how to dissect this, but the question was, what advice would you give to those who want to become a pioneer of industry and who want to become a trailblazer as opposed to maybe be a traditional founder or maybe somebody who wasn't looking to move the needle to such a degree?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that should be the goal, honestly. And not only because, say, you get rich and famous and all that, it's because I think it's easier. Competition is really hard. Ultimately, the people you're going to compete with have already crossed certain hurdles. Maybe they've gotten funding they've already built their business. They've done some things, they're credible. And people are smart. And sometimes they're desperate and they're trying to feed their families. They care. So anything you come up with, they probably thought of already. So competition is really hard. When you're in a mature market competing against someone over a couple pennies per ride, I mean, that's tough. So what's the alternative? The alternative is go do something no one else has done before. And then, your only competition is yourself. The hard part about that is you got to go find that thing, right? For me, from my perspective, I would say the way that folded in, it translated through risk. I mean, you saw the video of Damien, one of our first employees, literally calling a rickety golf cart while he was standing behind a McDonald's. I mean, it's the craziest thing to look back at. It's like, this stuff will never work. But you have to look at it with the optimist eye and you say, well, this stuff could work if we devote, many tens of thousands of hours of people hours and tens of millions of dollars of capital. So I think it's really squinting at something that, to many people might look a little bit crazy or ridiculous or not quite possible, but being willing to take the risk and saying, well, on the unlikely chance that this is possible, I will be in a green space and there'll be no one else around me. I mean, those are the opportunities that I think entrepreneurs should really look for.
Yeah. The art of the possible. What I like to say, if this were possible, how would we do that?
Exactly. That's right.
Fantastic. Thank you. I know we're getting close on time, but I'm going to ask a future question. So how do you think about the technology that you're building outside of cars? Like, where do you think the expansion of autonomous technology will go in the future?
Well, it can go a lot of places. I mean, the great thing about what we're doing is that it's not necessarily unique to cars. There's certainly a lot of devices you can think of that look kind of like cars, but they're doing something else. They are, moving earth at a construction site. They're pulling ore out of the ground at a mine. They're, let's say, monitoring a business after hours to make sure that no one's in there who shouldn't be in there. You can come up with a bunch of different scenarios that are high value scenarios for what we'll say autonomous, now not driverless, but autonomous technology. And we look at all these different use cases, these different verticals, different adjacencies, whatever you want to call them. So I think the great thing about what we're doing as we push forward the technology development for cars, we're going to kind of create opportunity and unlock business opportunity in these other markets. And that's certainly, it's part of our plan that, in some future period, I won't commit to a specific date, but at some time in the future, if we're having this conversation again, Motional isn't just focused on cars, we're doing other things as well, but the same core technology. And that's great. When you think about value creation as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you want to be focused on your core mission, but you want to always be thinking out of the corner of your eye, where's the next pot of value going to come from? How do we unlock the next $1 billion opportunity or $10 billion opportunity? And sometimes it's through something totally different. You look at Amazon and then AWS, well, man, where did that come from? But often, I would say more often, it's an adjacency to one of your business lines. And you say, boy, if we took that and applied it to that, or maybe took that and combined it with this and applied it to that, we could have something new and exciting. And that's what we're going to do.
Perfect. Well, we've got maybe a minute here for one final question. And the student question was, is Motional planning on coming to U of M for recruiting, which I think is a perfectly fair and good question. But I will modify that question to pose to you as someone who was born in Detroit, who went to school here in Ann Arbor, and who now has some comparison with what's going on the East Coast and around the globe. What in your mind is it that makes U of M students and U of M talent that is produced differentiated? What is it that makes this area special?
I mean, we're the leaders and best. That kind of says it all, right? It's even in the fight song. No, look, here's what I love about recruiting from Michigan and the Midwest, and we should be doing more of it. I don't know why we're not. I'd have to fire someone. But I'm gonna generalize now and be a little bit stereotypical. But UM students are smart, they're focused, and they're often fairly humble. People know what they know, and they also know what they don't know. You got to be able to tell a story. All these things we were just talking about. You got to be able to pitch, but you also got to be able to be honest with yourself. You got to be, serious. You got to be credible. If it's all smoke and mirrors, people will see through it. So I think, what UM students have is that great combination of work ethic, smarts, but also humility and understanding of where they came from, what they can do, what's possible. And that's really powerful.
Oh, love it. What a great note to end on. So thank you so much for your time, students. I know we didn't get to all of your questions. We will try to get them answered with Karl and his team in the future and get them back to you. But Karl, thank you so much for lending the time. Sincerely appreciate it.
And we are hiring, so please send me your CV.
All right. Perfect. You heard it here first. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.